Welcome, everyone. My name is Ada Bobbitt. I serve on the Venture Forward team at United Way, and we are so excited for this second workshop in our Innovation Strategies for Nonprofits series. So the first webinar that we hosted was facilitated by Neha Marty from Southern Champion Tray, and she discussed brainstorming, empathy building techniques for nonprofits. And so if you haven't had a chance to watch that, I will share the link after this webinar because that's a great tee up into today's conversation. But if you haven't seen it, no worries, you won't be completely lost. But we do have a really exciting session today. It's gonna be interactive, and it's hosted by one of our favorites, Michael Weiss, with MSW Innovative. And so we are so grateful that he's agreed to come and share today. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to Michael, but make sure that you do have your chat open. I see that most everyone has their videos on, and that makes my heart so happy. We love seeing your faces. And so we'll get started. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate that. So as I was busy trying to arrange my screens here dealing with Zoom's idiosyncrasies, I had to close the chat window. So Ada, I'll trust you if something is said in the chat window that I need to know about, just interrupt and call my attention to it. So hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of this innovation series. I am Michael Weiss. I run an independent consulting in town called MSW Innovative, focused on innovation techniques and agility. And we are going to cover, so let's start going. So that's who I am. Look, my picture. So here is where you left off, right? In the design thinking process, it is a series of divergence and convergence, right? So divergence as we get broad and go out, and then we come in, and then we go out and we come in again. So this is where you left off. And so this is what we're going to cover today. So I know the title is brainstorming, but you can't brainstorm until you have something specific to brainstorm on. So that's what we're going to cover. I do want to make this pretty interactive. We are going to practice some brainstorming, but also we're going to have some conversation. So hopefully be prepared to unmute yourself and share and talk, and we'll do things like that, and we'll work together through this. At any time, please interrupt me to ask a question, to raise a point, to add context. And we have a nice small group, which really lends itself to good conversation. So that's what I would love us to do today. So let's dig right in. At the last session, learned all about empathy. So among the various techniques, right, there's empathy interviews, there's observations, there's role playing, there's surveys and questionnaires. There's 100 things you can do when you are in the empathy gathering stage. So now you have all this data. What are we going to do with it? And many people feel overwhelmed at this point. And I'm going to give one cautionary tale here, or cautionary message. Do not jump to solutioning at this point. It is a very common practice, and it's very tempting. Hey, we talked to all these people, so obviously they need this. This is what we should do. Now, depending upon the size of the problem and the impact, maybe that's appropriate. You've had this brilliant insight, and that's fine. But if you are following the design thinking framework, you have to go through these other phases to make sure you're solving the right problems, right? To make sure that you're solving the problems that really meet the needs of your users. This is one of those things where we say it a lot. It's not about me, it's about them. I may be designing something, but I'm not solving for me. I am solving for the people I'm trying to help or make their lives better or reach or whatever. So do not jump to solutioning. So there are a couple of things you're going to do right at the beginning of the define stage. First, you got to unpack everything. Hopefully you're working with a small team. That's always what works best, when you can bring some perspectives to the table. And literally start writing down post-its, right? What did we hear? What did we see? What did we experience? You start to make connections between your data. Hey, we saw some patterns. We saw some things that were really surprising. Here's a tidbit, right? Because you've gathered all this data, and some people ask me, what should I pay attention to? And to me, anything that, this is going to sound weird, anything that catches your attention, you should pay attention to. Did you learn something surprising that you didn't expect? Are people doing some kind of manual workaround? Like, hey, there's a process to do this thing, but a lot of people are doing manual workarounds. Always pay attention to that. When your users have either shown their own creativity, pay attention to that. Pay attention to strong emotions. As you're observing and talking to people, if people are really angry, really sad, really happy, really excited, anytime it's one of those superlatives, pay attention to that. I'm not saying do anything with it yet, but note it, pay attention to it. Make connections with your data. This is an opportunity to also do research. A lot of people sometimes think as they're getting into design thinking that it's all fuzzy and feelings and things like that. And there's a lot of that, but there's a huge portion that is purely data driven. As a quick example, I was working with the Downtown Council on how might we make downtown safer and cleaner. And a lot of people were speaking very strongly about safety. It's unsafe, it's unsafe. And everything I was hearing saying, this is something we got to focus on. And then we started digging into the data. And the data says downtown wasn't actually all that unsafe. By the statistics, violent crime downtown for a city our size was much lower than average. Now, does that mean all these people were wrong or crazy? No. Perception is reality. But now we have a different problem to solve. The problem is people feel unsafe as opposed to they are unsafe. And that's going to lead us to a whole different set of solutions. So research, backing up, iterating around, right? Dig into it. Another thing, when we talk about modeling here, something that's really useful to do in this stage is called a journey map or a customer journey map. And that means not doing a process diagram. So let's say people are interacting with your organization in order to achieve something. Don't map the process that you follow, map the experience they go through. So for example, with say 211 at United Way, the journey might be, you know, I am a Chattanooga citizen. I call 211. I sat on hold for a minute. I spoke to, you know, I'm talking about my experience. I had to fill out a form. I sent in an email, whatever I might do. And you map that out and you correlate it to people's emotions and reactions that you've been discovering through your other observations. You would draw on the map, smiley faces, frowny faces. You could even draw it like a graph as they go up, happy and sad, whatever makes sense to you. But map the customer journey. Again, you're not solving for anything. You're mapping the current state. Then you can start to make changes, say, wow, here's an area of opportunity. Wouldn't it be great if people here are really upset, if we could make them really happy? And then you focus on that and start concentrating some of your brainstorming on that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about define, but in this stage of unpacking your data, making connections, how to get more data, does this make sense to people? And we're on video, so head nods or thumbs up or thumbs down. Awesome. Look, we're interactive. Okay. One of the things, oh, cool, thumbs up simple from Ada, awesome. One of the things you can do at this stage, and in 90 minutes, we're not going to be able to deep dive into any of these. You will be sent this presentation afterwards, so you can dig into a bit more, but a really useful tool is called empathy mapping. And there are two flavors of empathy mapping, and I personally use a combination of the two of them. This one on the right is basically unpacking. So you talk to a person named Jamie, or Jamie might even be representative of your user base. Okay, what does Jamie say? Like, what did you actually hear Jamie say, or the group that Jamie represents? So these are Jamie's words. I was expecting something different. What brand do you like? You know, there's something that Jamie said while buying a TV. Okay. In does, these are things, what does Jamie do? These are things that should be directly observable, right? Like if you were standing there watching Jamie try to buy a TV, you could see her doing this, this, this. Then from this, on this side of the line, we start to get into our intuition and what do we feel is going on. So what is Jamie thinking? What thoughts are going through her head? And what emotions? Now, the difference between these can sometimes be confusing, but just try and separate out. These are thoughts, things going on in their head. what emotions is she having? And then we can start to build our persona of Jamie. The other way of empathy mapping that a lot of people like is the hear and see. So this is a hear and this is a see, right? We can hear Jamie say stuff. We can see Jamie do stuff. This one is, what is Jamie hearing? So what influences them? What do their friends say? That kind of thing. What does Jamie see? Right? And then what do they think and feel? Now the gain and the pain and gain sections are really important. I use these two no matter which version of empathy mapping I'm doing. In this situation, because remember, we're still in define, which is part of empathy, right? We're trying to define the situation. We're trying to define the problem. What pain is Jamie having, or our user, right? What are their fears, frustrations? What are they struggling with? Not just in our process. A lot of this is around context. So if Jamie were calling 211, what pain are they feeling? What drove them to call 211 in the first place? And then gain is, what do they hope to benefit? What does your user want to achieve? Not necessarily what they want to do. It's a really important distinction. What do they want to achieve? What are they trying to get out of it? If Jamie calls 211, not what do they want to have happen, what do they want to achieve? Okay, so empathy mapping, really powerful and important tool.
So give an example of that achieve versus what they want to have happen for 211. Am I trying to achieve getting money for my rent, or am I trying to achieve not being worried? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So let's take that example, right? I'm calling 211 because I want rent assistance. My pain is, and we'll cover some of these categories, right? My pain is I'm about to be evicted. My feels are I'm scared, right? I'm worried, I'm concerned. This is my pain. What I hope to gain, ultimately my achievement, is I don't want to be evicted. I want to keep my home. Now, if we say my gain is, or the person's gain is they want money for rent, you have very narrowly defined the solutions you might come up with. They don't actually, I mean, in their head, they would say it. They don't actually want money for rent. What they want is to not be evicted. They want to keep their home. And the reason why that's important to us as designers, if we say the solution is we have to get Jamie money for rent, all we're going to be focused on is money. We have to get money. How do we get money to Jamie? Money, money, money. Whereas one of our solutions might be able to negotiate a forbearance with the landlord. One of our solutions might be some side of barter, right? That we're going to give the landlord a year's membership to the Chamber of Commerce, and Jamie gets 2 months of free living. I don't know. But by truly focusing on what your user is trying to gain and what they're trying to achieve rather than what they're trying to do, it opens you up to much more creative solutions. And it's also really important to highlight what they're trying to achieve outside of the context of what we do, right? Like, we're not in charge of apartments and rents, or United Way helps with money, for example. But money is not the ultimate solution. Jamie wants to keep her home. So that's what we should. Now, the solutions we come up with really truly might be about making money available to her, and that's fine. But we don't want to cut off these more possible creative solutions. Does that make sense? Awesome. That was a really, really good question. And we'll keep focusing on that a lot as we talk about this, focusing on what your users are trying to achieve rather than why they might be interacting with us in the first place. Really, really important.
Hey, Michael, can you speak to a little bit about the amount of people you should probably observe and get to fill out these empathy maps in order to really have a better understanding of what to explore?
That's a great question, and everyone asks it. They always say, how much time should I spend in the empathy phase? How many people should I talk to? And you're going to hate the answer. The answer is you should talk to exactly the number of people you need to talk to. So, and I'm not trying to be smart, but it's different for everything. A lot of it depends on how big a problem you're working on, right? If it's something relatively small, you might talk to just a few people. If I'm trying to solve something big like racial division in Chattanooga, I'm probably going to talk to a ton of people. There is also a bit of return on investment, right? They use the phrase ROI in business all the time. It applies to nonprofits. We have to get an impact return on our investment of time and money. So if we're talking about something that is going to affect maybe the entire city, I'm probably going to spend a few weeks in the empathy phase, gathering data and talking to different people and things like that. If it's going to affect a couple hundred people, then probably I'm going to spend a little less time. Not that they're less important, but it's about the return on investment. One of the things that you do want to think about as you're talking to people is looking at outliers. And if you think of a bell curve, right? Big hump in the middle at the ends. As you think about your user population, they're going to fall along that bell curve by various degrees. So let's even take like, economic status of people who call a 211. You're going to have people who are extraordinarily poor, struggling in crisis, and you're going to have some people that are doing really okay. They just may call occasionally for some information, and then you have a large cluster in the middle. Human nature and standard statistics say, look in the center, right? Look at that average to get a picture of the whole. I don't like that method. To me, if you observe the average, you'll design for the average and you'll get average, rather than having something truly impactful and amazing. But if I look at the outliers on both ends, if I look at the people, let's say I'm working with a business on customer service, if I look at the people who are incredibly angry and the people who are incredibly happy, I will learn things about the entire curve. And if I can design a solution that meets the needs of both ends, it will, of course, meet the needs of everyone in the middle. But if I design for something that only meets the needs of those in the middle, I'm going to lose the outliers, which are generally where real impact happens. So I know that's not a precise answer, but does that give you some insight into this? So the person asked the question, are you still there?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. That's great.
Okay, thanks. I want to make sure, a lot of times there aren't hard and fast answers with design thinking because it's not a quote unquote process, right? Go talk to 20 people, do this, do this. There are phases and there are tools, and every situation is different to know how much time I'm going to spend in a certain phase, what tools I'm going to use. A lot of it has to do with what's the existing situation, what am I trying to achieve, and what's the scale of impact. So still talking about this aspect, after your empathy mapping, you will create personas. And personas are a description of, it's a fictional person, but it encompasses everything you've learned about that group. And again, the number of personas you have will largely depend on the impact, the size of what you're trying to achieve, as well as your user population. You want to make sure that different flavors of your user population are being represented, but that you don't get too, into the weeds with them. So if we were looking at the car buying process, we have Carmen the car buff, and I might have also, Nellie the novice or something like that, right? One who's really into it, one who's not so much. This person looking for a job, he's 21. I might also have, so this person might be looking for a first job or a very early job. I might have someone in the middle of their career, and I might have someone towards the end of their career, that kind of thing. I probably would also have a persona of someone who already has a job versus someone who desperately needs a job. So those would probably be the personas that I would come up with, say, for the job searching process. There are lots of different templates out there. Google is definitely your friends. But the idea is you want to capture a picture of the person. So you'll see both of these have demographics. And then we have things like either quotes from them or different areas, or just simply, what are they like? What are they trying to achieve, right? Gain and pain. So we're condensing all that. And the reason we create personas is they become our touchstones as we move forward. We should always be referencing. We should always be thinking about them. It's funny that this one is called Henry. When I was working with Unum, one of the groups I was working with did come up with a persona called Henry that was actually an acronym that stood for High Earner, Not Rich Yet. So they were someone that was earning over $75,000 a year, but under 250, because they're earning a really good income, but in their minds, they aren't, quote, rich. And they were a very specific type of person they were targeting for sales. And they referred to Henry all the time, just in meetings. If they were making a change to strategy or promotional materials, someone would call out, what's Henry going to think of this? How's Henry going to react when he gets this in the mail or whatever like that? So these personas become huge touchstones to ground you in your users, because it's about them, not us. So this is all around the unpacking, analysis, and what we do with what we learned from empathy. What questions or thoughts are people having at this point? All right, doing good. Moving forward. So we're still building towards being able to do ideation. Remember, we are in the convergence phase here of define. We're getting slightly narrower, slightly narrower. So we need a point of view statement. It is sometimes also called a problem statement. You'll see it expressed different ways. There are different templates. There's no right and wrong way to do it, but in general, it follows this format. So someone needs to something because of reason, okay? And we fill this out. We want this to be descriptive with adjectives, right? We wouldn't say, John. We might say, John, 30-year-old single male living in an apartment in East Brainerd, needs to not lose his home, or is scared about losing his home, right? What do they need to do or feel? Or needs to feel secure that he won't be evicted. Because what are some of the insights we have? Not just, well, duh, no one wants to be homeless, right? But because he is working as hard as he can, but by having to care for his children as a single father, he can't put in the hours he needs and is struggling to make the rent, things like that. And we put that all into a point of view of our user. A lot of people also include the second half. So sometimes the point of view is just these three things, but a lot of times I like doing this in order to really focus on achievement. So it includes their achievement and their roadblocks, gain and pain. We keep coming back to gain and pain. Our goals in designing for people are to help them achieve their goals and remove pain. It always boils down to that. As a nonprofit, especially we're about that, but even as a business, we want to help them achieve their goals, remove pain by having them do business with us, right? We don't want to sell them a product. We want them to achieve their goals by using our product. It's a very different mindset, but very empowering. So as we come up with this, we start to form our how might we statement. And anybody who's been involved with the design thinking at all has heard about the how might we statement. And this is leading us to brainstorming. A brainstorm is a way to answer these questions. So after we come up with our point of view, we're going to create multiple how might we's, okay? Lots of them, not one. We're going to lots of them. Design thinking is very, very iterative. Hopefully that's been explained to you. You've gotten that. We go through the phases and we loop around and we go back to them. So we want to create a lot of how might we's here because we're not sure where the perfect solution is going to lie. These are focused on, as I say, removing pain, resolving their problems, helping them achieve their goals, or leveraging existing strengths. We might do that as well. How might we take this thing we know works and have it do even more? We want them to be focused, not vague, but this is critical. I'm going to keep pointing out this trap. Do not jump into solutioning here, right? The how might we is not how might we create this solution that we already thought of. So these are examples, with an example of ice cream, right? How might we redesign dessert? That is way too broad. We need to focus more on that. How might we create an ice cream cone that catches drips? Well, that's got the solution baked right into it, okay? If the answer to your how might we sounds like an implementation plan, you've made it way too narrow. How might we redesign the ice cream experience to be more portable? Now we're focused. we're focused on a particular kind of dessert, and we're focused on a particular problem. I want to be able to walk around with my ice cream. Now, the answer to that might be an ice cream cone that catches drips, but it might be a special bowl. It might be an edible bowl. It might be a new kind of ice cream that doesn't melt, right? The whole thing around the how might we statement is not to force a particular solution and not to exclude solutions. Even if we were talking about the problem of transportation, right? I wouldn't say, how might we get a special travel lane for trucks on the highway to, avoid traffic jams? We might say, how can we ensure shippable goods are getting to their destination without impacting everyday commuters or something like that? Don't bake the solution into your how might we. Just to give you some more examples. This is from the Stanford Design School. So the challenge, they wanted to redesign the ground experience at a local airport. Your challenge is your big thing. What are we going to look at? We don't even know the problem we're going to solve, but what are we looking at? Okay, this is when people are at the airport, what is their experience? Now, you're going to come up with lots of point of view statements from that because there are lots of people interacting. There's security issues and this and that. But in this example, one of the point of views they came up with, because in their empathy gathering, they realized this was a really big thing. Our harried mother of 3 is rushing through the airport, only then to have to wait hours at the gate. And she needs something to entertain her children because, quote, annoying little brats are irritating other passengers who are already at their wits' end. So we have our who, right? Or situation, we have what she needs. She needs something to keep her children occupied. And notice we said entertain. So we are explicitly removing solutions that involve drugging them, tying them to chairs, things like that. It would certainly meet the needs and it would probably be entertaining to other passengers, but we are excluding those solutions. So we're trying to make them less annoying and help the other passengers as well. And look at all the how might we's you might come up with. And again, you're going to get these. So we can amp up the good, we can remove the bad, we can look and see, how do we make the wait itself more exciting? Or, I love these, questioning assumptions. These are like my favorite how might we's. How do we just remove the wait time? How do we eliminate the problem entirely? Okay, for leveraging free time. You can read these for yourselves. So think of your how might we. So from one large challenge and a particular point of view, we've got 10 how might we statements. And from these, we would do a bunch of different brainstorms, and from those, pick the ideas that we wanted to do. And so there's pieces to all that. But here's how we get to the how might we that we're going to work on. What thoughts are people having at this point? This is a critically important step. If you don't start with the right how might we, you're never going to come up with your best solutions.
I can see why it takes time and experience to train oneself to know how to approach asking those questions.
Yes. Asking the right question, to me, is more than half the battle. If you can come up with being really skilled on asking the right questions, the answers almost magically appear, from my experience. So it takes practice. I'll say this for any aspect of design thinking, practice the techniques in everyday life. If you're just sitting and, well, we don't go to the airport anymore, but if you're sitting waiting at the airport, practice doing observations. Practice thinking and practicing empathy and wonder what that person's going through, or even talking with people. Practice with things you learn. Maybe you're working on a project and you're not using design thinking, but you know what? Based on what I learned, how would I unpack this? How would I come up with a how might we? I know we've already got a project plan and what we're doing, but if I had done it this other way, would we have come to the same place? You can just practice these techniques over and over again in little bits. And that way, when you're doing a quote for real, you're really good at it.
Michael.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Ben Weigel. I chair the board of the Samaritan Center, but talk a little bit about the flip side of that. How do you practice not asking the wrong questions?
That's a fantastic question. This is why, first of all, I like working with a team. Having other people who are in the same headspace as you that kind of get design thinking or get this approach, you can keep each other honest. And I almost like playing these ad hoc games with friends of mine when I'm working on a team. A classic example, if you're at, say, we're at a friend's house and I go to grab a drink from his fridge and I see that it's filled with German beer. That's a great opportunity to practice. And I might go to a friend of mine and say, can we assume that Bob loves German beer? And we'll come up with 10 different reasons why his fridge might be filled with it rather than he loves German beer, right? He could have taken it in trade. It could belong to a guest. It could be, you know, someone bought it for him as a gift and he hates it. We don't know it, but we learn to question our own assumptions. Assumptions, bias, and judgment are the enemies of the designer. And that's what we all are as we practice design thinking. We are now designers. So really learning to question your own biases and assumptions become critically important.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So I think, you know, we're at a really tender moment right now where people who are white and are used to being in charge of things have to really, in walking through this process, realize that there are totally different perspectives outside of what we are privileged. We have a privilege that we don't think from certain perspectives. How do we make sure that is that in the analysis of the people that you make sure that you're looking at a lot of people who don't look like what you expect people to look like? How do you overcome bias toward the majority?
So that's a fantastic question. You're right. Everything that's going on right now is a great opportunity to practice empathy, and people are almost being forced to get skilled at it very quickly. So yes, first of all, observing and talking to people not like you is always a good idea in any situation when you're trying to build empathy for coming up with some kind of solution. And also, as I say, talking to people that you might not normally think of as being impacted, right? So even just with this airport example, we're focused on the mother of three, but when I was in that, you know, waiting area of the airport, I would want to talk to the businessman who's sitting quietly in the corner, just to find out what he's thinking, how's this situation impacting him, things like that. And learning to ask questions that don't guide answers. Things like, how are you feeling? What's your impression? And even asking people, what are you trying to achieve more than what are you trying to do? When you're designing for people, the question that I will usually never ask them is, what would you like me to do? Many times people don't know or they can't envision. The classic line, whether he actually said it or not, it's been attributed to him. Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Rather than saying, tell me about your pain, horse feeding and manure and things like that, and what are they trying to gain? Shipping their goods, traveling with their family, get them out of the solution to think about their own pain and gain. So there's definitely an art to this, and just practice it at every opportunity, even in conversations, casual conversations. I could even think, if you're going out to lunch with somebody, rather than where would you like to go to lunch, how about what kind of food are you feeling like right now? And they might say Italian, and then what is that? What about Italian is attractive to you right now? And you might come off like a weirdo, but that's okay. But really understanding, why do people think? Because we make assumptions there too. You say, oh, Michael wants to eat Italian, therefore he likes Italian. I didn't say that, right? I might want to eat Italian right now because it was the favorite food of my grandmother and today's the anniversary of her death. You don't know until you talk to people. So you have to dig. It's like the 5 whys that people might be familiar with. Why are you feeling like that? What does that mean to you? right? That kind of thing. So just practice, practice, practice. Any other questions before we leave this section? All right, so here we are. We've made it through the define phase, and we are now at this point where we have a whole bunch of how might we's. And then people say, well, which one should I do first? I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but think about, so like we go back to here, right? We might focus on the one that excites us the most. Say, wow, this would be really cool, removing the wait time. Or we might say, we know that's going to be a big deal. We don't have time for that. Let's focus on something more quick hitting. So a lot of it depends about the time you have to put in, your budget, your appetite for risk, your appetite for change. So again, not necessarily a right or wrong, but certainly know the how might we you pick is going to frame the solutions you come up with. And it's not a one and done. I might work on this how might we today, knock it out of the park, and then come back and deal with a bigger one later. Nothing wrong with that. So as I say, we're here, and we're going to move into brainstorming. The goal of brainstorming, I know it's written and I hate reading slides, but I'm going to do this because it's so important. The goal of brainstorming is not to generate an idea or even the best idea. It is to generate lots of ideas. Later in the framework comes selecting quote unquote best or narrowing in. But remember back here, we are diverging again. So we want lots and lots and lots of ideas. We'll worry about quality later. Lots of ideas. That's what happens in a brainstorm. People who've never done one before think they're chaotic, but there are best practices. Some people call them rules. Some people don't like the idea of rules, but they're absolutely best practices. And there are lots of different ways to brainstorm, and we're going to cover a bunch of them, but they all follow these best practices. Some may not apply if you're working on your own, but let's go through them. We talked about quantity, not quality. Do not worry about the quality of an idea because we're deferring judgment. This one is so huge. If you can only remember one best practice, remember this. During the brainstorm is not the time to judge an idea, and including judging whether judgment should have an E in it or not. I get grief on that middle E. So most people think this means don't judge other people's. If I'm working in a group and someone gives an idea, I shouldn't say that sucks or that's bad. That's kind of obvious. I also shouldn't say things like, well, we tried that once and it didn't work. I also don't want to judge it. Well, how would that work? How are we going to pay for that? All that counts as judgment. Do not question the ideas at this point. We will have time for that later. During a brainstorm, if someone comes up with an idea, I want to encourage them and I might say, that's great, and to keep us moving. That doesn't mean I think the idea is great. I think it's great that they had an idea, and I applaud them for having an idea and speaking it. So the other part of judgment is deferring judgment on yourself. We have all had this experience in any kind of group setting where you wanted to say something, you wanted to offer something up, but you didn't because you judged it before it ever left your lips. They'll think it's stupid. My boss might not like this. Well, they'll never vote for that. We'll never be able to do it. Stop it. You have an obligation to the brainstorm. If it pops into your head, say it out loud. Offer it to the group. It can be discarded. But we have to have these wild ideas. No limits. And when I mean no limits, I mean no limits on money, no limits on time, no limits on the laws of physics, space, and time, no limits on laws. I don't care. I used to get in a lot of trouble when I was leading brainstorms at Unum, and I'm really trying to get them to come up with some wilder ideas, more creative ideas than let's come up with a different claim form. And I'd say, I want to hear ideas that are illegal, unethical, and impossible. And I got a call from the law department saying, please stop asking people for illegal and unethical ideas. And I'm like, it's just ink on paper. We're not actually going to do it. We're not even saying we should do it. It's just ink on paper, but I had to stop saying it. But come up with those.
So is that in part, Michael, because there is a hidden gem somewhere, some wild idea creates a kernel of a thought that then develops into something valuable, whereas if you were being more constrained, you might not discover that kernel?
You are 1,000% correct. So first of all, on one hand, the simpler answer is sometimes you're not the best judge of what's possible. You might think it's not possible to do this idea, but someone else who's an expert say, oh no, we got the tech to do that, or we have the money to do that, or someone already has that thing over there that we could use. So sometimes you think something's not possible, but really is. But let's go for the crazy one. And this idea of building on ideas, that's what you're talking about, Carla. And I'll give you an example. We were doing a group that I was a part of. We were practicing brainstorming because we're geeks like that. And the challenge was, how might we redesign shopping carts? If anybody has seen the shopping cart video about IDEO, it's a great video. If you haven't, look it up. Look up design thinking shopping cart and you'll find it. But we thought, let's try. What other ideas could we come up with? So we're brainstorming, we're throwing out ideas. And one guy says, we should attach rocket engines to shopping carts, and people could jump on the back and those rockets would shoot them down the aisle. Awesome. Obviously impossible, obviously never going to happen. But the next person said, that's cool. And, because remember, it's always yes and, not no but. Yeah, and what if instead of actual rocket engines, we put motors, like small step motors, on the wheels of shopping carts, so that when grandma has 500 pounds of cat food in the shopping cart, the motors would help push the cart along and she wouldn't have to struggle so hard. Awesome. Another guy, yeah, and what about instead of attaching rocket engines, we made the shopping cart look like a rocket, and the kids would have a great time being in the rocket, and they can even have controls that lit up and, you know, shot water vapor out the back. Two ideas that are practical, creative, and could really go a long way to solving problems that never would have come into being if someone hadn't said rocket engines. So that's why you have to take off the limits, come up with the wild ideas, and then build on the ideas of others. By building on your idea, maybe changing it, I'm not negating your idea, I'm not saying you're bad, it's yes and. Yes, your idea and this one, and this one, and this one. So you're absolutely right on the money, Carla. In order to do this effectively, it has to be one voice at a time. When you're doing any kind of group brainstorm, everybody needs to participate, but one voice at a time. Because in order to build on someone else's idea, you have to hear their idea. And if you're talking, you're not listening. And that also means if you are self-talking, if you're just saying, all right, I'm waiting for Carla to be quiet so I can talk, I'm waiting for Carla to be quiet. Okay, my turn. No, one voice at a time with everybody listening. Part of this, and I jumped over this one, is staying focused. Stay focused on the topic, stay focused on the activity. So when you are brainstorming, you are not implementing. Oh, rocket, you know, having a cart that looks like a rocket ship. Well, I know a guy that he built one and we could talk to him and now you're down a rabbit trail and the brainstorm has stopped. Stay focused on brainstorming, stay focused on the topic. So if I say rocket engines on shopping carts and someone says, oh man, wouldn't that be cool if we used rockets to deliver groceries faster to the stores and we could ship goods all around the country? Great idea, not what we're talking about. So maybe you don't want to lose that idea and you just have to write it down to yourself and shove it in your pocket so you can focus. But stay focused on the topic, stay focused on the fact that you're brainstorming. Don't drift. Really, really important. As you are writing down your ideas, they talk about this, think and write in like newspaper headlines. You want just enough words so that someone else who reads it at least gets the gist. Okay, so if I wrote on a Post-it, rocket, no one's gonna know what that means. But if I put attach rocket engines to cart, that's enough. I don't need to give any explanation. Remember, ideas do not include how you would do it. It's just the idea. It also helps to draw visuals. We are visual animals. We were visually processing communications for millennia before we ever learned written language. It's how our brains work. So you could also, in addition to the headline, draw a little picture of a shopping cart with rocket engines on it. You could draw happy kids. You could do whatever like that. Have those visuals. And then lastly, in terms of the people involved, and again, this is especially when you're obviously doing group brainstorming, have a facilitator if you can. It really works out better. This is someone helping people stay on track, not guiding the brainstorming, but making sure people are adhering to these best practices, making sure they're staying focused, right? Challenging them if they start to drift or if they start to wind down, ramping up their energy. Maybe they'll throw in a real instigator idea just to jumpstart the ideation again. But a facilitator can really, really help. And then who you have in the brainstorm, have a wide range of participants. Remember, again, I was talking about outliers, right? So I've got, we've got our 3 person design team, but we should have a couple of folks that would be actual users of our product or service. That's the best. When you can have your actual users in the brainstorm, that's wonderful. You can have stakeholders, you can have subject matter experts, and then what I really love, and this always scares people, I like having detractors and I like having wildcards. So detractors are people who are absolutely against what you're doing. Have them in the brainstorm. The ideas they come up with, and again, hopefully at least they're an honest enough person to say, all right, well, I think this is stupid, but I'll participate. The ideas they come up with are sometimes so amazing, you wouldn't even believe it. So, and a detractor might be someone, let's say you're redesigning the shopping cart, your detractor might be someone who hates supermarkets with a passion. I only do online shopping. I wouldn't set foot in a supermarket if you paid me. I want that person in my brainstorm, okay? Because they're going to come up with really cool ideas. And then wild cards are people who are just interesting, clever people. I had like a small tribe of these folks that I would call on. First of all, they're very comfortable with brainstorming, so they know the process, but they have no interest in the topic. They, not one way or another. They have no stakeholder in it, but they're just good brainstormers. I love having them in there too, because they also either come up with great ideas or trigger ideas of others. Those are the best practices. I have talked enough for the moment. Before we start practicing, what are people's thoughts on all these? Either questions, what's scaring you about this, what's exciting you about this? Interactivity.
It's
Someone was about to speak. Nope, no one. Ada.
It's a lot of work.
What was that?
It's a lot of work, and it's time consuming, so that makes it kind of scary. I mean, you hear about it, you think, oh yeah, I want to do that, but then when you sit down and think, okay, I'm going to actually try to walk something through this, it feels daunting, I have to confess.
You're entirely correct. Thank you for sharing that, because you're 100% correct, and everybody feels this way, which is why I like practicing this for either low risk or low impact or no impact items, right? If you're thinking about what should we do for Susie's birthday, do this. And again, the risk of either not following the best practices or just learn when am I straying, right? Am I really good at deferring judgment? Just practice. And if you do it on these low risk things, it won't seem so daunting when you're trying to do it, quote, for real or something very impactful. And as I say, if you're doing a low impact, trying to come up with some solution, you're not going to spend a ton of time on this. Maybe you don't have a facilitator. Maybe you don't have a huge range of participants. These are best practices, not rules. It is up to you to say what makes sense in this situation. But if I'm doing a project that I know is going to impact a lot of people, and maybe I'm already committed to spending a lot of time and money on it, yeah, I'm going to make the investment. And when people would push back on me, I was working with one group and they were trying to find ways of saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. and they didn't want to take a day. They said, I actually talked to this one person, and I said, I have a proposal, and I believe the outcome will be saving millions of dollars. But what I need is a group of 10 people from different areas, and I'm going to need them for 50% of their time for 2 months. Now, to me, the ROI on that is a no-brainer. And I almost put my career on the line. I said, I promise you, we can come up with $1 million ideas, but they wouldn't do it. So you have to decide, is it worth it to you, and then commit. If you want big outcomes, you got to make big effort. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. But it's a good point. Yes, sir.
Michael, this has been, I like the idea of the wild card. We
Mhm.
spend a lot of time trying to get the stakeholders involved and people who have an interest or a special interest. And I really like the idea of just some objective people who have no dog in the hunt, as you say,
Mhm.
and just might have an idea. So I like
Mhm.
that idea a lot.
It really does work. And also, you know, when you talk about the size of a group, in terms of if you're having a bunch of people actually brainstorming together, you really don't want to have more than like 6 people, not counting the facilitator. So if you're thinking about large groups of people, you would want to separate them or have separate sessions. One of the things, again, to realize, you're not going to have, if you're talking about a big deal thing, you're not going to have a brainstorming session. You're going to have a bunch of brainstorming sessions, right? And this also isn't the time to pay politics. I've seen that so often. Like you said, we have to make sure we invite all the stakeholders. And if we invite him, we got to invite him. And oh, we better invite them or we'll hear. I don't care. I want the people who are going to lead me to the best possible outcomes. And yeah, a couple of stakeholders is great, a couple of users, but I'm not trying to be politically correct and make sure I invite everybody because I've already spoken to them in the empathy phase. Their points of view are already represented because hopefully we met with them during empathy. So it's a really good point. The detractors and wildcards, they really do good. And if you get into this a lot, as they say, you start to have a team of people that you can call on, right? Say, hey, we're doing a brainstorm on this. Let's call Patrick. Let's get him in here and be one of our brainstormers. So cool. Any other questions or thoughts at this point? All righty, let's do it. We're going to practice. This is going to be the classic group brainstorm, and Ada is going to put the link to the brainstorm. Hopefully, if you've done any others with Venture Forward, they've used idea boards. And if we were standing around in person, I always have this thing. I say, write it, say it, post it. And that means you write it on your post-it, what your idea is, you say it so the group can hear it, and then you stick it on the board. Okay, so it's involving visual, it's involving hearing, it's involving movement. I want to get all parts of our brain and our body involved in a brainstorm. Now, of course, that looks slightly different when we're doing things online. So everybody can see this. Has everybody made it to the idea board? Thumbs up. I'm still working on it. If you haven't used one of these before, you click on this little green plus sign, and that brings up a sticky note, and I can start typing. This is my idea, and I just hit enter. And that's it. You have put up your sticky note with an idea. So what's our how might we for this brainstorm? What I want you to do is I want this group to think of as many different uses as possible for a paper clip that have nothing to do with holding pieces of paper together. I want to think of 100 new ways we could use a paper clip for something so that we can open up new markets for paper clips and all get filthy rich. So we're going to practice. So I need everybody to come off mute because I really want us to practice how we would do this in a group brainstorm. So when you write it down, and even though we can all see it, I want you to write it. I want you to say it out loud, and then okay, you can post it up, or whether it's posted and then you say it. But I want us to be listening. I want us, yes, to come up with our own wild ideas, but we're going to build on each other. So we're going to do a group brainstorm, all of us. I'll be the facilitator. So the person who started, you can call out your ideas.
See, I posted this. It's simple S hooks for hanging keys. So you put your, you undo the paper clip and you can link it or hang it on one end, and it opens up another clip on the other end, and it just allows you to hang up a hat, a hat, keys, anything like that.
That's awesome. Next.
Open your iPhone SIM card mechanism.
Beautiful. Who else?
Create an extender for necklaces in the back of
Very
your
cool. Love it. What else?
Pick a lock.
What was that?
Pick a lock. A door.
Yeah, that's a great idea. What else?
Press
Make a
the
button.
elevator buttons because of COVID.
Okay. So just breaking the fourth wall a little bit, that would be to write out as a headline, press an elevator button. So that when I go back to that, we'll know what that means. If you double click on it, you can edit it. Okay, who's next?
You can
Love a bag of chips.
Awesome, who's next?
you can unfold them to create a nose wire to make your COVID mask fit your face.
Very cool. Who's next?
Building off the extender idea, I put that one on there. So when you've gained a little bit too much weight over COVID time, you can extend your pants a little bit by clipping it onto the belt buckle and the hole as well.
That's awesome. Who else? Yeah, I've got one. Cheap earrings. Who else has one?
Make an iPhone stand out of it.
Fantastic. Post that up there. What else?
You can label your flowers in your flower pot.
Oh, very cool. Love it. Ben, you're on mute. I wasn't sure if you were trying to talk. What else? Who else has an idea?
A hook for your cubicle wall.
Oh, excellent. What else? Here's one. Clean my fingernails. What else? Okay. Someone posted key ring or key organizer. Make us do this for 30 more seconds. Let's see if we can come up with 5 more ideas in 30 seconds. Get out there. What's wild? What's crazy?
Packing tape end finder.
Ooh, good one. What else?
You know, it's funny. I think we all spontaneously use paper clips for different things, but now that you're asking us.
That's a good thing. So what ideas and what can we do that we haven't thought of yet? Excellent. Someone put up simple earrings. What else?
Leverage use it as a leverage to open the corner of a Tupperware that's stuck.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, 2 more. 2 more ideas.
Hold your corn cob.
There you go. Love it. And letter opener. Nicely done. Big round of applause to everyone. Let me see it. Yay. All right. So let's debrief. How do people feel doing this?
Good.
Well, what did you notice? Either what worked well, what felt good, or maybe what was hard about it? Because this is the idea. We're teaching you guys how to do this. So now I'm putting you almost in the role of facilitators. What worked well? What was hard?
The task was easy to relate to. We all have experience with paper clips.
Mm-hmm. That's why this is a really good practice one to do.
Yeah, but sometimes it's hard to just spontaneously generate it. Now, maybe if we were involved in a process that was all about paper clips leading up to this point, because we manufacture paper clips and we're trying to come up with a new marketing campaign, maybe we'd have a little more juice for this specific task.
What about others? What did you notice? So if we remember, let me go back to, did people notice all these best practices in effect?
I did feel happy, like when somebody came up with a good idea and posted it, I was like, oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's a judgment or not.
No, happiness is fine.
It actually caused me, Carla, I would say for me too, when someone had a good idea, it made me kind of go, oh yeah, and it sort of generated another idea for me.
Yep.
So the positive vibe was contagious.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The vibe is contagious. Now, I know we're living in a COVID world now, but it's why, when possible, I prefer in-person brainstormings, because that contagion, that energy is magnified in person. And it's like this tornado of energy, and the ideas just start coming really faster, and you get this yes and mentality. It can be replicated online. We probably have a few too many people to do it well. That's why I like 4 to 6. To me, it's the perfect number to avoid the over talking. But that energy, Patrick, yeah, that is key, and it really should happen in a good brainstorm. What else do people notice in observing these best practices in practice? What about the role of the facilitator? What purpose did, and don't worry about my ego, but what purpose did having the facilitator serve?
You egged us on.
Cool.
You gave us a common goal. We were running out of time. Let's do 5 more ideas. So, we had to contribute to that smaller goal of generating 5 more ideas.
Yeah. And thankfully, no one needed to be brought back in line like a wandering sheep. But like Carla, when you started talking about the brainstorm experience itself, if someone had taken that seed and continued the conversation, I would have stepped in and stopped it. Because now's the time for brainstorming. We can talk about brainstorming later. But the group naturally fixed itself. So that's why the facilitator is really important. Drawing visuals, again, that can be harder online. These are best practices. But people did well with headlines. And the idea is if we go back to these, pretty much all of them, I wouldn't need anyone to explain it to me, right? I get the idea. Which is why when it was just, and not picking up, but when it was just button, if I went back to that tomorrow, I'd be like, button? Huh? What? Oh, and this is now make a button for your clothes. But there was one about pressing elevator buttons with it, or as a poker, which was a good one too. So that's why writing in headlines is important that way. Just enough so we remember what it is. We're going to talk about some other methods of brainstorming, but this is the key. This is what brainstorming is. Do people have any questions at this point? All right. I noticed that we're not running out of time, but we're getting towards our time. And I want to make sure we get through these. So, Carla, you raised a good point. Not everybody is adept at brainstorming on the fly. So there are variations of solo brainstorming and also brain writing that can be done. And one of them is for people who really need time to mull things over, you can give them the how might we ahead of time. Hey, tomorrow, 2 days from now, we're going to be doing a brainstorm about paper clips. Between now and then, everybody needs to come up with 10 ideas and bring it to the table. And those would be shared at the beginning of the group brainstorm, but you're giving people a chance to process and think. There are good things and bad things to that. The good things is the folks who are a little more analytical in nature, who really need time to process, you give them that time, but others start to overthink it. They start to almost talk themselves down from the excitement of paperclips. And so you really have to know your audience. You have to understand the social style of your audience members, of your brainstorm participants, and design the best way. You can also do forms of brainwriting in a group. So what we can do, for example, is, and I've often done it in person, but you can do it online. So if there are 6 of us, I have 6 pieces of paper around the edge of a table, and we're all standing in front of one. And we write an idea. We don't say it out loud. This is completely silent. And we write our idea on the piece of paper. Then we rotate. And as I'm looking down at this paper in front of me, I can add to that idea. I can add another idea. I can modify it. And maybe if I'm dry, I can just say, this is awesome. Not detract, nothing negative. And then we rotate and rotate and rotate. And it's a completely silent exercise, because some people are more writing, thinkers, things like that. And it takes away some of the anxiety. Not everybody likes speaking in public and things like that. So solo brainstorming and brainwriting can be very, very effective. Starbursting. Sometimes for an effective brainstorm, what you really need are more questions. So you can have a brainstorm to generate as many of these who, what, why, when, how questions as possible. And these can be questions like, what will people do with this product? How will they engage with their service? What do they want? What do they really want to achieve? Where do they live? Where are they located? Where would they interact? So even like we're talking about something, say the 211 kiosk that United Way came up with. Where would they use it? When would they use it, right? How would they interact with it? How will they use the kiosk in a time of COVID? Things like that. So these aren't negations, but they're questions that we would then answer through conversation or more brainstorming. But sometimes what you need, and we're not going to do this like in the interest of time, but sometimes what you need are more questions. Role storming. This one is really, really fun. It works obviously way better in person. There are ways to do it online, but essentially you are role playing and everybody takes a thing. So, you're the 211 representative. I'm a person who needs it. You're my kid, and everybody gets a kind of a role, and we act things out. And we can start by acting out the current situation, and then we can make tweaks. Hey, what if we did this? Or I could just start reacting a different way. I could just start doing something different. And you're brainstorming by actually acting it out in real time. When you're doing this, it can be very helpful to have a scribe to capture some of the things that are being said and done, so everybody can just get really into the moment, and you can tweak things, you can change things, you can have people take on the role of equipment. It's like, okay, I'm the table. What if I was over here? And you don't have to ask permission. This can be so much fun to do. It's just, you know what? I'm the table and I'm taking myself out of the room. No more tables. Okay, let's see what happens. How would we do it differently? That kind of thing. This one's really, really fun. Superhero. I really like superhero. This can be a fun one. You're focused on a particular problem. So let's say we are trying to do something about to help people who've lost their jobs due to COVID. So this would be an example of iterative brainstorming, and there are a number of methods that require iterative brainstorming. And first we come up with who are the role models. These can be people or these can be companies that just somehow just seem to do really well in the area of creating jobs or keeping people employed. So-and-so is just known, they've never fired anyone, or they have 0% turnover at that company, or they're always growing, or it doesn't have to be someone current. Hey, in the Great Depression, this company actually grew their workforce or whatever, okay? And you would list out all these role models. Then as a team, we would review them and pick the one we think has the most potential. It's like, this one's either the most exciting, or this one, it just seems to, yeah, they were successful in a time that seems similar to ours, or for whatever, there's no right or wrong way, but pick one of these. And you kind of move it into this next phase and you say, okay, what are the characteristics of this role model? What made them successful? They had lots of money. They were charismatic. They were obnoxious. You know, they were tall. It doesn't matter. Again, in a brainstorm, it's kind of no right or wrong. But what are the things you think? Why are they a role model? And these are characteristics. So not necessarily things that they did, but things that they are, or aspects of them. You might say, oh, they were a really small company, so they were nimble and could pivot, right? So the ability to pivot, all these characteristics, and we list those out. Then as a group, through whatever method, we decide these ones are the most important and the most applicable to us. Like if we had to pick just a couple of reasons, a couple of characteristics that truly made them successful in this area, we think it's these. Then you bring them over here and say, how do we apply that? If we felt that their ability to pivot and change quickly is what made them successful, how do we pivot and change quickly? And now we're brainstorming. Now we're thinking of possible solutions to our problem that leverage those characteristics. Okay, does that make sense, how this went? Or any questions? And in terms of doing this, I would probably spend, depending upon your group, 3 to 5 minutes in each of these categories, right? So brainstorms shouldn't go on forever. They also shouldn't be too quick. And one of the things you'll notice I did as a facilitator is when the idea started to run dry, I didn't end it right away. In a regular brainstorm, I'm probably brainstorming for a minimum of 5 minutes. And if they run dry after 3 minutes, we are going to stand there and stare at each other for 2. Trust me, ideas will come out simply because people hate standing and staring at each other. Also, as a facilitator, you notice sometimes I'll just throw in an idea to, you know, wind the crank up again and get people going. So superhero, really good method. I like this one a lot. This one works well when we're almost like we feel there should be things in place, or it's something we could possibly be doing. So a lot of these depend on what is your current situation, but what's stopping us? Why aren't we doing this right now? So if we were, say, a business that had a customer service line, or it's again 211, right? And we want 0 wait times. We want no one ever to be on hold. So we would start with, why isn't that happening today? What are the reasons why we can't have 0 wait times on our call? We list them all out. And it may feel negative, but that's fine. Okay? Then once we have our list, we select what do we think is the most impactful, right? We simply, let's say, don't have enough staff. We don't have enough people to answer the calls. Okay, bring that one over here. What are the reasons for that? Why don't we have enough staff? Or there's 2 parts to that. Why don't we have more people? Or why is the people we have not enough? Because now we're getting into things like call duration and efficiency and effectiveness. So list all the reasons and roadblocks why the staff we have, why we feel we don't have enough people. And we don't have money, blah, blah, blah. List all the reasons. Then you select, what do we think are the most impactful roadblocks? Like if we could somehow remove this roadblock, if we could somehow make this reason be not a thing, we think it would hugely advance us towards meeting our goal. So we bring them over here, and now we're brainstorming on solutions. How might we eliminate them? So we might say, let's say we feel the calls are just simply taking too long. We really feel the calls are taking too long. We bring over that. How might we make our calls shorter while still providing adequate service? And we brainstorm on that. Does that make sense? This one also very effective, kind of bakes in the idea of the 5 whys to this one as well. Because a lot of these, it's like, why is this a problem? Well, why is that a problem? And you can do this multiple times until you get at some things, hey, we could really do something about that. Any questions on that? All right. I'm just going to briefly cover these. Again, Google's your friend. You can look at these, but there's a whole category of brainstorming called framing, where essentially you put a frame around your brainstorm to give it a slightly different context. You are still working essentially on the same problem, but you're looking at it through a different lens, which will lend you to getting different ideas. These are really good to use when you feel stuck. When you say, you know what, we've come up with a bunch of ideas, but none of them feel like they're going to achieve the impact we're really looking for. None of them are earth-shattering. None of them are game-changing. So you start to use these. These first two I love because these get you thinking differently. So if whatever we're trying to solve, right? So let's say we're working on homelessness. If we lived in a world where everybody had a home, how would we create homelessness? What would we do to create a problem of homelessness? And which sounds awful, but by actually listing out all the ways, you then start to flip those, right? You start to look at what you came up with and you go, wow, this idea, that would hugely create homelessness. So let's take that and iterate, and how do we flip it? How do we make that not happen? Okay, so maybe if you feel it's around jobs, we come about creating more jobs. If we feel we create it by giving everyone mental illness, then we say, okay, how do we deal with mental illness? Whatever it is, you flip it. The same thing, and this is a variation, like how could we make things worse, right? So these are two flavors of the same thing. A flavor of this is also taking the opposite of your problem. So for example, wait times on 211, if our goal was to have 0 wait times, let's do a brainstorm on how might we create the longest wait times in history for everyone who calls. It sounds silly, and there should be laughter, and it should actually start to get funny. It's like, you know, whenever the phone rings, sit and stare at it for, 20 minutes before you answer, whatever. Make sure everyone plays solitaire on their computer for at least 4 hours every day, right? And then you start to take those, and how do we flip those? So if people are distracted with their various ideas, how do we make people less distracted, or whatever it might be? But all these things trigger solutions. What would Google do? This is a variant of superhero, and you can replace Google with Steve Jobs or Albert Einstein or Nikola Tesla, a person or company that would inspire you to be creative and think differently. So it's not us that's doing this. If we gave Google the problem of making information available to people, right, what 211 does, what would they do? And now you're going to start thinking, well, they'd create an app, or they would have a web thing. They would, have that Google Assistant that's completely robotic, even though it talks to you in a voice. They would look at that kind of thing. So really inspire different kinds of solutions. Elimination. What if something didn't exist? So take something that even you feel is fairly commonplace in our world and remove it from existence. How would you solve your problem then? So if our overall problem is connecting people with the resources they need, and I say, how would we do this in a world where telephone calls didn't even exist? There's no such thing as a voice telephone call anymore. How would we connect people to the resources they need? Analogous industry. Stop thinking of what we do and think of another industry where they face similar kinds of problems. So for example, if we were talking about customer service, and I've often done this, is compare it to the waiting room at a hospital for the ER. And how do they serve the most people the most efficiently and effectively? And now we start talking about triage and what kind of information they gather and stages of service, right? I don't walk in the door and walk right up to a doctor. I see someone who does part, and I see a nurse who does part, and then I see the doctor. So could we do that somehow to help our people and to break it up into phases? I don't know. But again, it's about framing our thinking. You start to get into, these are, I don't want to say silly, but you start to get outlandish because they will generate practical ideas. What if we have time travel? If we had time travel, so someone comes to me and says, Michael, I'm homeless. Well, I could go back in time and make sure that they never lost their job. Okay, well, we don't have time travel, but how could we make sure people don't lose their jobs or whatever? unlimited money, and again, Superman, whatever, and there's all kinds of ways to frame these, whatever means something to you in your problem. But the idea, if you really took off the restrictions, even of our physical world, how would we solve this problem? And then from that, to iterate, how would we leverage that? And then the last one that I really like, and it's called Kill a Stupid Rule. And this is really good, especially for internal stuff and processes. What do we have, all the rules that are in place that impact our situation? If we could eliminate 1, 2, or 3 of them, forget how, forget if we'd ever be allowed, forget if it's legal or whatever, but if we could kill that rule, that process step, that requirement, would that make our situation better? Would that remove people's pain? Would that help them achieve their goals? And if so, how can we achieve that? You know what, if we could eliminate this rule, and then you start to dig into that, well, why is that rule needed? Could we achieve it through some other way? You might not be able to get rid of it, but you might be able to meet that need in a different way. So kill a stupid rule is a really good focus area. So these are all framing. There's 100 more of them. These are the ones I use a lot. Questions, thoughts about framing? All right, I'm gonna wrap things up. So we're here now. We made it through the ideation phase. Yay! But Michael, I hear you cry, even though you're all deathly silent. We have 100 ideas. How do we prototype 100 ideas? And the answer is you don't. The very, very beginning of prototyping is idea selection. And Christy Montgomery, in the next section, is going to begin her webinar on idea selection. But just to kind of tee up that topic, there are lots of different ways. So we've got these 100 ideas. We can do simple voting, we can do complex voting, we can rank the ideas based on certain criteria. Affinity mapping is when we cluster ideas together based on common characteristics. Impact versus effort is you take them on a big grid and you start from low to high impact and low to high effort, and you start mapping them out. And then you see, wow, these we think are high effort, or high impact, low effort. Let's do some of these first. And then you can break apart your ideas, and this one's kind of fun too, into categories, like what are the most rational ideas? These just make a lot of sense, they're practical, but what are the most exciting ideas? Or what are ideas that are close to our heart? And what are some ideas that are, these are long shots, but man, if we could somehow do that. And then you can select from the categories. But that's for next time. So make sure you tune in to see all the exciting world of idea selection and prototyping. How do you prove your ideas, prove their value before making any kind of huge investment of time, money, or energy? And that's where we are. With 3 minutes to spare. What are people's thoughts or questions at this point? Talk to me.
So I'm just going to throw this out there. As you're thinking of questions or thoughts, I'm going to go ahead and launch our feedback poll so that we can get your feedback on today's session. But please don't let that stop the conversation. I'm just going to go ahead and launch it.
So does anyone have any either questions, final thoughts, anything like that?
So Michael,
It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in. It is indeed.
I'm a tool geek, Michael. So you showed us idea boards, which is great, simple tool. What other tools would you recommend people consider looking at to facilitate, maybe even in this remote work online session? How do we replicate this post-it note sharing and with our teams remotely?
So it's a really good question. There are a number of tools out there. What makes sense for your organization has a lot to do with how much you're going to use it and how much time you have. One that I just started using that I like is called Limnu, L-I-M-N-U. It has a really nice, in addition to sticky notes, it has a lot of whiteboarding for collaboration to be able to draw and share. The downside why I didn't use it for today's session is it didn't have voting capabilities. So you'd have to think of a different way to do that. But it was much more flexible when it came to whiteboarding than Stormboard's. There's also one called Miro, and these are all free, which is why I selected them. M-I-R-O, Miro, which is also a really good collaboration tool and whiteboarding. So they're out there, and I think, again, Google's your friend. There is one that I really like, but it requires money, so I tend not to recommend it, but it's called Stormboard, S-T-O-R-M-B-O-A-R-D, stormboard.com. They do have a free account, but it only allows 5 users in that account, and that includes the people participating in your brainstorm. But if you have a small internal team and you're not trying to invite lots of people to collaborate remotely, Stormboard has a ton of features available for free, but you have to pay if you want more people involved. So those are some of the tools that I like to use online. Any other questions? All right, well, we are out of time. So Patrick or Ada, I'll let you wrap things up. Thank everyone for your attention. I am always available. I think, I don't know if my contact information was available in the invite. When we send out the PDF to you all, we'll have my contact information. If you'd like to talk to me more about this or any related topics, you feel free. So yeah.